The scream was mine, but it sounded like glass shattering in someone else's throat. Harper said, "It wasn't supposed to spread," while the group chat lit up like a firestorm. My secret pulsed on a screen, cold and public. I tasted metal and disbelief. "Nia," said Emily, "breathe," but the room kept shrinking until the walls pressed fingerprints into my back. Harper wouldn't meet my eyes. Noah's name flashed in the thread, carved into my mistake. Harper said, "You told me first," like a prayer warped into a blade. I remembered promising nights, our pack stitched with pinky fingers and late pizza. Now, every promise felt counterfeit. Someone added a flame emoji, and it felt like gasoline. I said, "You swore," and the word collapsed between us. Noise from the street arrived as sirens and taillights. The air smelled like rain and hot cables. Harper said I was hurt, and I watched guilt slip behind her perfect smile. Something in me went quiet, then colder. The storm moved from outside to inside, humming in my bones. Harper said they were going to find out anyway, and something fragile snapped. I stared at the message thread, a living autopsy of trust. Nia said this isn't the place, but every place now felt wrong. I remembered the night I told Harper about Noah, how she smiled too long. I ignored the flicker and called it loyalty. The ceiling creaked like a warning old houses whisper. My chest burned with the weight of being made public. Harper said, I panicked, and the words sounded rehearsed. The apartment smelled like wet denim and burnt coffee. I scrolled and saw my confession clipped and twisted. Noah didn't reply, which was its own verdict. I thought about how betrayal never arrives empty. It brings mirrors and makes you stare. Silence landed like a heavy book, flipping to the worst chapter. Harper said, "You made it complicated," and I felt the sentence bruise. Complicated was the ribbon she tied around a knife. I said, "You posted it," and the truth sat between us like spilled oil. Nia said, "Please stop," but stopping is not what pain does. I imagined Noah reading my words through strangers' eyes. The thought pressed a ring of fire around my throat. Harper looked at the window as if escape hid in rain lines. I remembered how we promised to be each other's first call. Tonight she made me everyone's spectacle. The clock ticked loud and petty. Somewhere a neighbor laughed, and it sounded cruel by accident. I walked to the shelf and fixed the crooked photo of Noah. My fingers shook and steadied. Harper said, "He deserved honesty," like she rented the word. Honesty without consent is theft dressed as virtue. I breathed slow to keep from breaking all the way. Nia said, "This is not about Noah." But he was the center of the gravity now. Not for love alone, but for the math of betrayal. I said, "You wanted to be first," and Harper didn't argue. The storm thinned to a silver hiss. The room felt colder around the lamp, like light at edges. I thought about the cost of letting someone hold your softest part. Tonight the receipt arrived, long and itemized. I asked the question I was afraid to know. I said, "Was it envy?" And the word felt like a door I finally opened. Harper blinked, then smiled like apology's distant cousin. She said, "Maybe I was tired of being your shadow," and the room stilled. Nia made a sound that might have been no doing. I felt every year of our friendship stack and tilt. Memories rattled, soft things breaking in the fall. I said, "You could have spoken," and she shrugged like speaking was cheap. Somewhere in the hallway a light clicked off. I realized I was done begging the truth to be kind. If love was a house, we had pulled out the main beam. The ceiling would come down either way. Morning light slanted across my childhood room, painting stripes on the faded wallpaper. I heard laughter from years ago, Harper's voice mixing with mine, tangled in summers that felt endless. I said, "Remember when we swore we'd never change?" And the memory pressed warm against the cold of last night. Harper's smile in my head was softer, untouched by envy. We shared ice cream from one spoon, lying on the porch swing, believing forever was stitched into the fabric of our days. My chest ached because love and betrayal used the same door. I whispered. We were unbreakable, though the word cracked. Sometimes pain comes from remembering how sweet it once was. The silence of now mocked the echo of before. I remembered the carnival lights, Harper tugging my hand toward the Ferris wheel, both of us dizzy from cotton candy. She said, "This will be our forever story," and I laughed until my ribs hurt. The air smelled of fried dough and fireworks. Trust then was sugar on the tongue, not the ash it became. I saw her face lit by neon, wide-eyed, fearless. We traded secrets like prizes, certain no one could take them from us. I whispered, "You were everything," but the echo belonged to someone else now. The memory hurt not for what it was, but for how it betrayed me by surviving. Rainy afternoons once meant Harper sprawled across my bed, scribbling hearts in my notebooks. She said, "No one knows me like you do," and her eyes carried truth then. We built castles from words, fortresses from secrets. My mother brought cocoa, steam curling between us like soft vows. I thought friendship was eternal because love wore her face. The betrayal now gnawed deeper, because once she had been my safest home. I whispered, "You were family," but the word felt like a gravestone. The sound of rain outside blurred the boundary between past comfort and present wreckage. We walked through autumn leaves once, boots crunching in rhythm, every step a shared heartbeat. Harper said, "We'll always have each other," tossing a leaf crown onto my head. I laughed until tears stung. The world back then was golden, the air crisp with promises. I believed forever lived in every leaf we kicked skyward. Now, remembering felt like swallowing glass. I whispered, "You lied before you even knew you would." Betrayal isn't only an action, it's the haunting knowledge that love once lived in the same mouth that destroyed you. The leaves outside rustled, mocking the memory. We promised each other forever on New Year's Eve, fireworks bleeding color into midnight sky. Harper said, "No matter what happens, you first," and I believed her. I held her hand as the crowd cheered, as if we could outlast time itself. The memory now burns like cold fire, a reminder that even vows shouted under exploding stars can be broken. I whispered, "You were supposed to be my always," and the silence after felt cruel. Memories don't save you. They sharpen the knife when betrayal comes. The night I thought was the start of forever had been only the beginning of loss. Monday arrived like a bruise that would not fade. I stood at my desk pretending the emails were important and not just noise. Harper said, "Can we talk later?" and her tone tried to sound ordinary. Nothing about us was ordinary anymore. Mia messaged, "I'm around if you need me," and I stared at the blinking cursor like it could answer for me. The office hummed with printers and stale coffee, and the small talk of people who still trusted things. I said later won't fix the past, but my voice was smaller than I wanted. Harper hovered by the glass wall, reflections split by fluorescent bars. Noah's name sat heavy at the bottom of the thread like an anchor I could not lift. I rehearsed 100 lines, and none of them healed. The clock pushed its hands forward as if time could drag me across this. Silence pooled between steps and emails, and my heartbeat counting losses. By noon my phone wore a crown of missed calls. Harper said, "Please pick up," and each voicemail stacked like plates I could not carry. I let them rest there, fragile and loud. Mia said lunch downstairs, and her kindness made the room tilt. I kept seeing the post, the comments, the easy cruelty of strangers. I said I need quiet, and the elevator mirrored me back, pale and stubborn. Outside, the sky pressed low, and the wind smelled like metal rain. I wanted one clean sentence to end this, but endings do not listen. Harper waited by the lobby plants pretending to scroll. I walked past because I was not ready to be remade in public. My chest hammered a warning rhythm. The door hissed, and the street swallowed me with buses and horns, and the ordinary lives of people who were not breaking today. The coffee shop was a harbor with shaky ropes. Noah sat by the window, sunlight cutting his profile into bright and shadow. He said, "I saw it all," and the words were calm like a surface hiding depth. I said, "I wanted to tell you first," and regret scraped my throat on the way out. Cups clinked, milk steamed. A barista called a name that was not mine. Noah looked at the street, then at me, then at the space between us. He said, "I needed the truth, not an audience," and I flinched. The hurt did not come from volume. It came from precision. I said, "She made it public," and the sentence felt like a door I kept closing too late. He did not defend her, which surprised me more than anger would. Outside, a cyclist flashed by like an option I did not take. I held my cup and pretended heat could be courage. Nia met me on the riverwalk where wind kept secrets moving. She said, "I think Harper is hiding more," and the sentence landed like a stone. I wanted to argue for the version of her that still laughed with me under fireworks. I said, "There has to be a reason," and heard the tired plea in it. The water slapped pilings, like a metronome for doubt. Mia watched me the way people watch a ledge. She said, "I heard she messaged Noah before you told her," and the world tilted again. I did math I did not want to do. The numbers kept pointing to the same sum. I said, "If that's true, then this started long before the post," and the sky felt lower. A gull cried, and the sound shredded a piece of me. Mia reached for my sleeve and did not let go. Her silence said, "I'm here, even if she is not." I texted Harper to meet at the old basketball court, where we once traced stars on asphalt. She arrived with a careful smile that broke on the edges. I said, "Did you reach out to Noah before I spoke to you?" And the question sat heavy. She looked down, then up, then past me. Harper said, "I wanted to make sure he knew my side," and the air thinned. I said, "You made a triangle out of something that needed two," and the chain link hummed with passing traffic. She said, "I was scared of losing everything," and fear sounded like appetite wearing perfume. The court lights clacked on, throwing long nets of light across our shoes. I felt the map of our friendship redraw itself into borders and fences. I said, "Then you chose," and the wind took the last warmth from the day. Somewhere a ball bounced, and the rhythm did not forgive us. The truth landed not with thunder, but with a whisper that gutted me. Nia said Harper told Noah everything weeks ago, and the air cracked. I said, before I spoke, and the words burned holes in my chest. Harper stood in front of me, arms folded like armor, but her eyes flicked away too fast. She said, "I didn't mean for it to turn this way," and I hated how calm she sounded. Secrets rot long before they surface, and ours had been festering. The sky above was bruised purple, heavy with storms that mirrored us. I said, "You broke us before the crowd ever saw," and silence ballooned. Betrayal rarely comes sharp. It creeps, waits, then strikes. My voice trembled, but it did not break. I knew the shape of the knife now. I replayed the weeks before, every unanswered call, every delayed smile. Harper said, "He deserved to know," and the words tilted the ground beneath me. I said, "You wanted to be first," and she did not deny it. Truth slipped from her lips like venom disguised as virtue. Nia looked between us, the weight of judge pressed on her quiet shoulders. I saw Harper not as friend but as rival, who had been hiding her moves. The street lamps blinked on one by one, as if exposing the shadows we kept. I whispered, "You rehearsed this betrayal," and her silence was its own confession. My phone buzzed again, another message from Noah I could not open. The weight of his silence was heavier than words. Harper said, "He's not angry." And I hated her certainty, as if she owned the outcome now. I said, "You stole my choice," and the street swallowed the sound like it wanted no witnesses. Nia said, "This is bigger than one secret," and her voice trembled with a fear she didn't want to name. I knew what she meant. The fracture was not only between us, it was inside me too. The storm broke then, rain soaking through fabric, erasing the difference between sweat and tears. I whispered, "You rewrote my story," and the night answered with thunder. From the shadows a voice I hadn't heard in years rose. Daniel said, "She's been doing this since high school," and the words sliced through the storm. I turned, heart pounding, and saw the shadow of my past step forward. Daniel, once Harper's ex, now my uninvited witness. He said, "She broke us the same way," and the timeline widened into something crueler. Harper's eyes went sharp, not guilty but cornered. I said, "So this isn't new," and rain streaked down my cheeks like proof. Betrayal had history. I had only joined the list. The past was not dead. It had been waiting. The world tilted as I pieced the puzzle together. Harper said, "That was different," and the lie quivered under her breath. Daniel said, "It's always the same," and the certainty in his voice burned. I said, "You make betrayal your language," and the words felt carved from bone. The rain slowed, leaving silence that pressed down harder than thunder. Nia stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm, grounding me. I felt history and present collide, a lineage of broken trust laid bare. Harper's mask faltered for a flicker, and I saw the envy underneath, raw and endless. I whispered, "You never were my friend," and the night sealed it shut. The auditorium after hours felt like a throat about to scream. I stood center stage while empty seats stared like a jury. Harper said, "We can fix this," and the echo made the lie enormous. I said, "You rewrote me," and my voice found iron it had not held before. The exit signs bled red along the walls like warnings that arrived late. Nia waited in the wings, a soft anchor in a storm built from years. Noah stepped into the aisle, and the room tightened around his breath. He said, "I wanted truth without spectacle," and shame crawled from my ribs. Harper reached for me as if contact could reverse time, but the distance had teeth. I said, "You chose the crowd over my consent," and the sentence landed like a falling light. Somewhere a door latched, and the sound felt like a verdict we could not outrun. The stage held our history and the weight of every promise that failed to hold. Harper said, "I was scared you would choose him over us, and fear tried to dress itself as love." I said, "You turned fear into spectacle," and the auditorium breathed like a lung on fire. Noah's hands were still, but his gaze searched for a version of me that had not been stripped. Nia said, "Tell the whole truth," and her words shook the rafters more than any shout. Harper looked at the balcony, as if absolution sat in row 12. I remembered the porch swing vows, and felt splinters in my palms. I said, "You texted him before I trusted you with my heart," and silence hissed. She said, "I wanted to be chosen," and the confession cracked the air. The seats held their breath, and the dust settled like tiny verdicts. I stepped forward, and the floor answered with a tired creak. The moment did not explode. It burned, steady and undeniable. Daniel's footsteps climbed from the rear like a coda no one asked for. He said, "Patterns repeat when we refuse to name them," and the truth sounded practiced by pain. Harper winced as if history had teeth. I said, "Your apology keeps arriving empty," and the room leaned toward the steep drop of consequence. Noah looked at Daniel, then at me, measuring the distance between witness and wound. Nia said, "Stop orbiting the hurt and touch it," and the sentence cleared smoke from my head. I turned to Harper and felt the floor rise under my spine. I said, "You envied me enough to break me," and the words tasted like iron. She said, "I envied how you were seen," and the mask finally lowered. The auditorium lights hummed like a warning line. I chose the hurt that would end us rather than the lie that would keep us. I said, "You will not carry my story anymore," and the sentence felt like clean air after a long tunnel. Harper reached again, and I stepped back because mercy without change is only rehearsal. Noah said, "I should have asked you first," and the gentleness stung worse than anger. I said, "We learn by bleeding sometimes," and the line steadied in my chest. Nia moved to my side, and the stage stopped tilting. Daniel's presence faded to the edges like a bruise that knew its place. Harper whispered, "Please don't leave me with this," and the plea found no purchase. I said, "This belongs to you because you built it," and the echo took root. The exit signs glowed like small red moons. I felt the ceiling lift, as if the room finally exhaled. The hush that followed was not peace. It was the space where something ends for good. The confrontation did not finish with a shout. It ended with a choice. I said, I release what you took and keep what you cannot touch, and the room stopped needing to witness. Harper said, who am I without you? And the question revealed the hollow that guided her hand. Nia squeezed my fingers and the future tugged, not gentle but true. Noah stood, then paused, then sat, understanding that not moving was also a decision. Daniel turned toward the doors as if the story had closed its final curtain. I breathed like a person who remembered where her ribs were. The years with Harper did not vanish. They repositioned into a map I would not follow again. I said, this chapter ends here, and my voice did not shake. The auditorium lights dimmed, and the red moons held steady. I walked off stage carrying the only thing that mattered. My name returned to me. The city felt hollow the next morning, like it had watched everything and chosen silence. I sat on my balcony with cold coffee, replaying every word like a wound I couldn't stop touching. Nia said, you don't owe her forgiveness, and the phrase softened the edges of my chest. I said, but I still ache for what we lost, because grief clings even when anger burns. The street below moved on, strangers carrying groceries and laughing into phones. My world had stopped, but theirs hadn't. I whispered, she was my family, though family doesn't turn you into a headline. The air smelled like smoke from a neighbor's grill, heavy with ordinary light. Nia reached across the table and squeezed my wrist, steady and warm. Sometimes healing doesn't look like closure. It looks like being held long enough to breathe again. Later, I walked past the park where Harper and I once carved our names into a tree. The bark still bore the scar, but the letters had grown crooked, warped by time. I said, forever doesn't survive weather, and the thought landed heavy. A child's laughter cut the air, reminding me of promises we once believed could never break. Harper's absence felt louder than her presence ever had. My chest filled with both anger and mourning, like fire and rain fighting in the same storm. I whispered, you took my trust and made it currency, and the wind carried it away. Memory can be both anchor and shackle. I left the tree standing, but I did not stay. Noah finally called, his voice low and careful, like he was afraid of breaking me further. He said, I never wanted this to be public, and each word felt like stitching through raw skin. I said, but now it belongs to everyone, and my throat caught. Silence stretched, thick and unkind. He said, I only ever cared about what you felt, and the truth in it almost undid me. I wanted to believe him, but Harper's shadow stretched long between us. I said, trust doesn't mend with apologies, and he sighed. Pain twisted into something quieter, resignation heavy but steady. The call ended without a goodbye, leaving only static in my ears and the hollow throb of what could never be the same. That evening, Mia finally spoke the words she'd been holding. She said, she was never worthy of you, and it stung because truth often does. I said, but I kept choosing her anyway, and shame bit hard. We sat on the stoop of my building, city lights humming like tired stars. Cars passed, and strangers' voices floated like background noise to our collapse. Nia said, she didn't just betray you, she betrayed who you believed you were with her, and I nodded because that was the cruelest wound. I whispered, then maybe I need to believe in someone else now, and the night felt lighter. Sometimes resolution is not repair but release. The days after carried a strange stillness. Harper texted once, I'm sorry, but I didn't answer. I said to myself, this silence is my justice, and the thought steadied me. Healing wasn't clean, but it was forward. I looked out at the skyline, bruised by twilight, and felt a piece of myself return. Nia said, you're stronger now. And maybe she was right. I carried scars, but scars are proof of survival, not defeat. Harper's absence echoed, but echoes fade if you stop feeding them. I whispered, this story doesn't belong to her anymore, and the night held my words without breaking. For the first time in weeks, I let myself sleep without replaying the past. Morning, arrived without ceremony. I woke to a room that no longer carried her shape. Mia said, "Eat something and place toast by the window." I said, "I can try," and meant it. The city hummed the way cities do when your life is both small and vast. I scrolled past the old thread and did not open it. That felt like a kind of prayer. Noah texted, "I hope you're okay," and I let the message rest. I said, "I am not okay, but I am here." The mirror offered a face I almost recognized. My ribs held steady. I dressed slowly and folded the quiet like a letter I would keep. Healing was not a finish line. It was a road that stayed. I walked to the bookstore where we once hid from rain between paper towers. The bell chimed like a remembered laugh. I said, "Start small," and reached for a blank journal. A stranger brushed past and said, "Sorry," and I felt kindness land. I took a seat by the window and let my hand write without defense. The words came uneven and honest. Mia messaged a heart that needed no reply. I wrote, "I survived her storm." My pulse eased. The page did not judge. Outside, clouds drifted apart as if making room. I did not forgive her. I forgave myself for staying as long as I did. At lunch, Noah waited on the corner with 2 coffees. He said, "No speeches," and handed me the warmer cup. I said, "Thank you for not pushing," and the air softened. We stood without fixing anything. That felt right. He said, "I will take your pace," and I believed him. Traffic hissed on wet asphalt from a quick passing shower. I said, "I am learning to trust myself first," and he nodded. The light turned green and we did not rush. When we parted, I carried the quiet like a good coat. There was room for care that did not cost me my name. By evening, I returned to the basketball court. The nets sang in a thin breeze. I said, "Goodbye," to a space that once held our easy stars. Harper stood across the fence, unexpected and small. She said, "I am working on myself," and I heard the distance more than the words. I said, "Do it far from me," and the chain link kept its quiet guard. She lowered her gaze and did not cross. The sky carried the first stubborn stars. I turned away before memory argued. My steps found a rhythm that belonged to me. Night gathered like a calm tide. I stood at my window and watched the city breathe. Mia called and said, "Proud of you," and I smiled into the dark. I said, "I kept what was mine, and the truth fit." I wrote one final line and closed the journal. The room held its quiet and did not feel empty. I whispered, "They didn't just betray me," and let the rest fall like a curtain. The last 10 seconds belonged to me. I chose the silence that heals. I chose the future that waits.